The Vehicons are basically Transformers versions of Star Wars stormtroopers. They are just treated as expendable cannon fodder and are often quite dumb. But despite that, there was one legendary Vehicon named Steve. But who exactly was he, and is he even real? Well, his alleged story begins in the first episode of Transformers Prime. Steve and his old mate were sent out by Starscream to track down the Autobot RC, which they were successful in that specific mission, but ultimately failed to defeat her due to the interference of Bumblebee and Bulkhead. This was only the beginning of Stevie's struggles. Later, he would be thrown off the Decepticon warship by Bulkhead, unintentionally helping Steve briefly capture Jack and Raph. He would then proceed to get beat up by Autobots as well as get his picture taken. What a handsome feller. For a short while after this, he wouldn't be up to anything much and would die after being shot by a disguised makeshift. And that is the story of Steve. Well, at least the first part. You see, Steve possesses the ability to be reincarnated no matter what happens to him. He actually returned in the very next episode after his death, and even knocked Optimus Prime out with a tree. Though death would begin to become all too familiar to him as he would be drained of energon by his own leader in the following episode. This was the second of his many deaths. Short after, he would mysteriously die again and return as an energon miner, only to be killed by Synth and Ratchet. Then reincarnated only to be shot by Orion Pax, returning again only to be fried to death. Once more reborn only to be thrown off a ship by Megatron. Maybe this time around things would be different? Nope, he would again perish 3 times by Wheeljack.
Thanks for the ride. Grenade!
But his worst death by far has to be when his energon was drained out of him by Silas, becoming a Terracon. After that, he would die once more in an Autobot attack. Not only did he die a lot, in between these events he would be slapped, kicked, tortured, beat up several times, and yelled at. However, in his epic final appearance, he teamed up with Starscream to destroy the new Autobot base, unknowingly blowing up the decoy instead. Poor Steve just can't catch a break. But there's good news. He survived. Be sure to give this video a like to congratulate our precious Stevie. And that is the full story of Steve the Vehicon. Kind of. What I just explained to you is purely the fandom's explanation of his existence. He is mainly just a joke for most unfortunate or dumb Vehicon troopers. But what most fans don't know is that Steve does actually exist, though his story is very different than the alleged one. In issues 5 and 6 of the Transformers Robots in Disguise 2015 comics, a recently defeated Steeljaw finds himself in the woods. While there, he discovers traces of energon and tracks it to an old Decepticon mine. However, he is confronted by 3 Vehicons who ask for his identification. Steeljaw successfully convinces the Vehicons that he works for Megatron and Starscream, leading them to introduce themselves. One of them then says,
I am Steve.
Steve goes on to explain he forgore his original designation after suffering cranial damage and adopted the name from a human billboard. But his story doesn't end there. Later, Steve and his old mates help capture Fix-It and Russell and bring them to the mine. When the Autobots eventually locate the mine to rescue their friends, they battle Steeljaw, his pack, and the Vehicons. But little did Bumblebee know, Steve had a secret weapon. A dead switch bomb given to the Vehicons by Starscream. As Bumblebee tackles Steve to try to disarm the bomb, Optimus Prime arrives on the scene and explains that the Vehicons have been deceived by Steeljaw. The Vehicons demand an answer, but Steeljaw can't give an effective one. Enraged, Steve rips off his own hand to throw the bomb at Steeljaw before the dead man's switch activates. After the battle, Optimus Prime and Bumblebee offer the Vehicons Cybertronian citizenship, assuring them that as former soldiers they will not be considered criminals on Cybertron unless they break the law. However, Steve and his old mates refuse and opt to wait for what they believe will be the inevitable return of Megatron. And that is the real story of Steve the Vehicon. The video's over, by the way.